welcome to New European Science Fiction Translations. Once more, thank you very much for coming to our small panel. My name is Jaroslav Olša. I'm a Consulate General of the Czech Republic here in LA, and I'm a science fiction fan for 40 years, a friend of Forry Ackerman when he was still alive, and publisher and editor of science fiction. And I will leave the floor also to my colleague.
I'm Jean-Paul Garnier. I am the owner of Space Cowboy Bookstore and Publishing House, and I've had the honor of publishing, for the first time appearing in English, The Martians, translated by Carleton here.
My name is Carleton. I'm a translator from Czech literature, and I've got a background in literary studies. I used to be a diplomat, like Jaroslav, but not as illustrious. And my current project is an anthology of early fantastic literature. And this is basically my perspective as a translator, is how did we get started with fantastic literature and science fiction? Those are questions I'm working on right now.
Okay, now we'll start the debate only explaining how the Czech science fiction is known. That means roughly 60 years ago, famous Czech writer whose name was Josef Nesvadba attended the Worldcon in San Diego. It's quite a long time, invited by Forry Ackerman. It was the beginning, in a way, of translating a modern Czech science fiction into English. Although we know that Karel Čapek and his R.U.R. was translated into English, still it was not a proper science fiction. That means first science fiction writer was Josef Nesvadba. What we know, and I'm doing it for the last 40 years, trying to push the Czech and European science fiction to be more visible. And please visit our booth in the dealer's room, where you can see plenty of unknown books you have never seen. We have produced various other books, like this anthology of 1980s science fiction by Czech writers, which was a fandom science fiction, because there was the communist times where you could not publish, in fact, officially, because it was extremely complicated. That means majority of the young science fiction writers were publishing in illegal fanzines, and this is the anthology of their writing, which was professionally published, usually only in the 1990s and later on. And we also produced and supported the production of 2 comic books, which are of quite interest. The first one is a comics version of R.U.R. by Karel Čapek. Might know that Karel Čapek coined the word robot. That means there would not be robotics without the Czechs, because if we didn't name them robot, there would not be robotics. That means this is the brand new comics produced by Rosarium Publishing a few weeks ago, and it's now available on the American market. And the very curious borderline science fiction is this one, which is absolutely curious. During the World War II, a Jewish population was, as you know, exterminated and going to concentration camps. And one of these concentration camps was named Theresienstadt in Bohemia, not far from Prague. But there was still some kind of a cultural life. And one of the examples of the cultural life was production of a dystopic opera named Kaiser von Atlantis, or Emperor of Atlantis. The opera remained, and we know about the existence, what it was about. And this is the original Oregon-based artist comics made on that topic of that dystopic opera created in the concentration camp in the Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. But we will speak more about 2 books which are brand new, which really entered the market now. And I will give the floor to Carleton, who will speak first about his first translation of Jiří Karásek Lvovitz, which is an important Czech writer of 100 years back. And also after he will speak about the very untypical women writers' science fiction novel from the 1920s, The Martians. Carleton, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Jaroslav. Thank you all for being here today. I think that this is a really interesting formative period for speculative fiction. And that's why I've been working on it for the last couple of years. I'm going to switch the order, actually, and start with Procházková. So Jean-Paul mentioned this book, The Martians. This is the first book of science fiction written by a Czech woman. And that makes it interesting right there. But the reason that I flipped the order was also because Jaroslav mentioned Karel Čapek. And one of the characteristics of Čapek's science fiction is its moralism. his plays and his stories very often have a very strong moral message. And you may or may not like that as a modern reader, but it's characteristic, it's a powerful part of his message, and this is also true of Emilie Procházková, who wrote The Martians. In fact, so important is this for her that she will often italicize parts of her text to emphasize the moral content in it. You know, she doesn't want you to miss it. But also characteristic of Procházková in this particular novel is that it is a spiritist novel. So she is working with her contemporaries' interest in spiritism, in esotericism, in the occult. These were very popular at the time in a way that kind of faded after World War II, but was really big just then. In fact, there's a cover of Amazing Stories that is focused on spiritism, and it's from the 20s, as I remember. But this is kind of a bygone phenomenon. It's part of what makes this particular book interesting. The Martians is also interesting because Procházková is expressing the proto-feminist ideas in it. A lot of scholarship has been devoted to stories like her story from 1915 and other early works of American science fiction that express early feminist ideas, but we really hear very little about other authors. So briefly, who was Procházková? She was born in Central Europe at a time when the territory was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was the Habsburg Empire, and it was a monarchy. But when she was a young woman, the place where she was living became a new independent country that nobody had ever heard of before. It became Czechoslovakia. I mentioned the period interest in spiritism and in the esoteric arts. But because she was living in a brand new country, there was also kind of an ideology that things can change now, everything is different now. When she wrote The Martians in 1922, women just got the vote 2 years before under a new constitution in Czechoslovakia. And there were also expectations that the old legal code from the Austro-Hungarian Empire would fall by the wayside and they would create justice in a brand new way. So this was a very exciting time, and you see this in the novella. She wrote just a few works that we know about. It's possible that she wrote others under a pseudonym, but the information that we have is that her first known work was from 1917. Welcome. Her first known work was in 1917, and it's about a spirit's journey through the astral realm. Again, this reflects period interest in spiritism. The next known work we know about is a hexalogy. So it is 6 short novellas. These novellas taken together express more interest in the spiritual realm, but also they describe relations between men and women and the independence of women in a way that was very new and almost daring. They end with some scenes from the Russian Revolution. So you also get a sense that her politics were very much on the left and even revolutionary. Lastly, it's this book. This is the last work of hers that we know about, The Martians. So in a way, it's the most mature work that she did. Esotericism, as I mentioned, was really popular. Esotericism is a big umbrella. It includes spiritism, seances, hypnotism, trances, communication with spirits, a host of other phenomena that generally lump together under this big umbrella. It makes this particular period of proto-science fiction especially interesting, I think, because scientists and speculators are talking in a way that they don't talk today. And they were really creating a kind of dialogue that has changed unrecognizably today. So it's fun to put ourselves back in that time frame and try to imagine how they talk together. One manifestation of that was that we see societies for psychical research. In 1882, they founded one of these in London. It was a forum where scientists and people who were interested in mind over matter or communicating with the spirits or clairvoyance would come together, and they would have serious or semi-serious conversations about how these things could be real. There was another such society founded in New York very soon afterwards, and then in St. Petersburg. There was one in Paris, but they called it something different because they were French. There were other such societies in Central Europe. In Bohemia itself, esotericism had a hotbed in eastern Bohemia at the foothills of the Krkonoše Mountains, or the Giant Mountains in English. There was a guy named Karel Čapek. He published works about spiritism and the astral realm. He was the publisher, in fact, for Procházková's first book about the journey of a spirit through the astral realm. And he stayed active in this conversation for many, many years. More recently, there's a historian of esotericism who's Czech, and he writes that in this period, quote, even good society was interested in these kinds of topics. So even from the upper bourgeoisie, you find people that participated in seances, and they might have taken it more seriously or less seriously, but it was part of the social setting. What I found in trying to research this book is that women were really prominent in writing with spiritist voices, in discussing these ideas, and in promoting these practices. By no means was this an exclusively women's realm. There are men as well, but women have very strong voices here. I can't really explain that yet, but I imagine that this had something to do with social expectations, that women's roles. Women were expected to be more sensitive about certain aspects of living and life, and maybe it was just more accepted that women engage in these particular practices. This is an area that deserves further study and further discussion. But one of these women was born in Russia. She moved to the United States, and you may well have heard her name, Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky wrote books that included doctrine of her movement, which was theosophy, but also fictional works that expressed theosophist ideas. She was a very prolific writer. She has kind of a mixed reputation today. Not everybody believed that she was always sincere in the ideas that she put forward, but if not, she was a very successful entrepreneur, and she also did a lot to promote Indian ideas, from the subcontinent of India in the West. And this was a period when Hinduism was gradually gaining acceptance. And these ideas find their way to theosophy as well. Other women include Annie Besant in the United Kingdom, and she also wrote manuals of theosophy and other books to promote these ideas. Vera Ivanovna Kryzhanovskaya was a Russian woman who was very well known at that time. She wrote dozens of novels that expressed these ideas. You can still find some of them as ebooks today on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble. But at that time, her novels were pretty popular across the continent, in the United States as well. She's best known in part for this one trilogy called Magi in Russian, or The Magicians. Katerina Lis Müller, her pseudonym was Helen Smith, was born of German parentage in Hungary, but she spent a lot of time living in Switzerland. She is the subject of a still famous psychological textbook. From India to Mars, she believed that she was a clairvoyant, able to communicate with people living on Mars in a language called Martian, that she was able to write that language, and that she was also able to paint scenes from Mars. When you look at the scenes that she actually painted, it's interesting that they show a lot of Orientalism in their actual imagery. This is another area that deserves further study. But this is who she was. She was the subject of a famous psychological study. This study was translated for a second time into English in 2008. And of course, there's Procházková. Kryzhanovskaya, Procházková, and other writers from this period, including some American writers, believed that they were channeling voices from the spirit world, or at least this is what they said. So in the case of Kryzhanovskaya, she believed that she was channeling the second Earl of Rochester, a voice from the 17th century. In the case of Procházková, she didn't say who she was channeling, but every book that we have from her said that it was written through this means. And at least in her case, I believe that she was sincere. I think that she really believed this. Mars, since the topic of her book is Martian, I wanted to mention briefly just that Mars has had a place in speculative literature for a long time. I think both of these gentlemen can tell us more about that, but
I think let's go to this novel because the people know about
okay, yeah. There's kind of a watershed around 1877. Mars and Earth came close together. Before that, Mars and the Moon were basically a setting for utopias, for reimagined societies. After 1877, we see an explosion of literature about Mars, or using Mars as a setting. Camille Flammarion was a French writer that we don't hear much about today, but he wrote a novel called Uranie, or Uranus. You can find this in English on Gutenberg Books. This was a book in which Flammarion, who was an astronomer and a scientist, but also a speculative fiction writer, imagined a different kind of life on a distant planet. Percival Lowell was an American astronomer, of course, but he also speculated about life on Mars and existence on Mars. And he was a member of one of these societies for psychical research, by the way, and so was Thomas Edison. Kurt Leswitz was a German writer, of course, and he set his novel on Mars, imagining a new world there after the close conjunction. Procházková's message includes many different aspects, but a really key part of them, I think, is imagining relations between men and women. In the hexology, she imagines a woman who, with her spirit, inhabits the body of a man, and that man then falls in love with another woman. And they get married and they have children. So in a sense, in this hexology, the two women become co-mothers. It's a really interesting concept for 1920 to 22. In The Martians itself, I encourage you to read it and look for the various passages. I'll just mention that Procházková describes the relation between children and mothers, so that the children really belong to the mothers, that on Mars they take the mother's names, they don't take the father's names, because they have a different relationship with the women who bore them. She also describes how women are independent not only in spirit, but also financially, and if they choose to have a relationship with a man, they enjoy absolute freedom in that. It can last for as long as they wanted to, or a very short time. So this is part of the appeal, I think, of Procházková's book. Lastly, I want to mention that you may be familiar with the Ansible from Ursula Le Guin and her Hainish cycle of novels. The Ansible is a device in Le Guin that enables communication between worlds. And Le Guin is a fascinating figure in her own right. Her parents were both anthropologists, right? So she really had a lot of fertile ground for her imagination. And she imagined this device as enabling communication with people we couldn't see from other planets. Before the Ansible, Procházková imagined something that she called celestial dictation, and it really a kick. It's a steampunk vision for interplanetary communication. It combines aspects of Marconi's telegraphy, so there's a going on in the background, but it combines that with Thomas Edison's gramophone. So part of the celestial dictation apparatus is also a disc that moves around in a circle, and there's a needle that records messages in it. And thirdly, celestial dictation in The Martian involves a trance. So that is the esotericist aspect. And this was how Procházková imagined that people from Mars or from Earth could travel through the astral realm and communicate with each other. It's an interesting science fiction vision too, because it doesn't involve zooming through space and having adventures where you conquer other races or you establish hegemony over them with superior technology. It's about communication. I think it's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful vision. It deserves to be read, and I hope you'll give it a try.
Thank you, Carleton. Maybe I will have a words from publisher Jean-Paul Garnier.
Thank you, Jaroslav and Carleton. This book is really interesting in a lot of ways. I mean, not only is it super early for science fiction in general, proto-feminist, but also in a lot of ways it shares a commonality with early 20th century utopic fiction. You brought up Herland, I'll also bring up Misora. However, this book doesn't go into eugenics. It doesn't go into Aryanism. It avoids the racism that is typical in early 20th century utopic fiction. I'd been reading a lot of women writers' utopic fiction a few years back, which was interesting that this book was proposed, because while some of the stories were great, it always devolved into racism. There was at least a chapter or two in most of these books, and this book does not have that, which makes it quite unique. It also has some very interesting ideas that might be foreign to us, and one of the great things about science fiction is we can get into foreign territory without feeling attacked. It has some very interesting and peculiar foreign to us ideas about labor, and how she envisions the structure and importance of labor in this Martian society. The other thing about this book that was incredibly appealing to me, and fortunately the publishing industry is starting to repair this. For the history of science fiction, it's been very Anglo and Amerocentric, but the reality is science fiction is a world conversation. Science isn't a thing that only occurs in a certain country or place. This is a human endeavor. And so, unfortunately, it took 98 years to appear in English, but appearing in English for the first time, and we're seeing more and more works of science fiction in translation. If you haven't been to SF in Translation, Rachel Cordasco's website, I highly recommend that if you're interested in world voices in science fiction. And she's also working as a translator. So as a publisher, it's very appealing to me to find translators willing to do this kind of work and to bring the world conversation to the United States, where we've been, so busy reading Americans and people and the British for so long. But it's a narrow slice of what science fiction has done, is doing, and will do. And just real briefly, I want to thank Crystal from Loscon to introducing us all to make this project a reality.
Thank you. And I will add one thing. What do you think that means? What can the book by a Czech writer from faraway European country have in common with LA? And it has. It's quite a funny situation. You saw the illustration. The illustration was made by a virtually unknown Czech painter named Václav Rytíř. We know some basic data about his life, and we have one curious, interesting note. That he lived in LA for some time. Maybe he died here, we really don't know. He changed his name Rytíř literally into English. Rytíř means knight. And he was publishing here under his name Knight. And he became even the president, I will quote it properly. He became the president of, the Bookplate Association International based in Los Angeles. That means what the really world and planets are. That means we have the communication between Earth and Mars here, but we have also a curious, unknown communication between Prague and LA in 1920s. And we really don't know what he was doing here, except that we know that he was the president or vice president of that organization. And it's otherwise unknown. More things to find.
And spiritualism has a history here in Los Angeles. Manly P. Hall's Center in Los Feliz, which is an immaculate occult library if anyone's interested in this sort of stuff. And Carleton's introduction to the book really gives a wonderful, amazing foundation of the relationship to spiritualism and culture in general and how it affected speculative fiction. Your research and the way you put together this introduction is fabulous. It provides wonderful context for the book. Another jewel that's in this book is the bibliography that Carleton put together of Eastern European women science fiction writers pre-1950. There was a few names I recognized on the list, but a lot of it was brand new to me. And this is like it's becoming a bucket list of things to search out. So there's a wonderful context provided, and then a broader picture that's introduced as well.
Maybe I'll add one more thing. Once more about the Czech science fiction in the 1920s and 30s. In a way, 1920s and 30s were a kind of a very good era for the Czech science fiction. There were tens, even a few small hundreds of science fiction books being published. The thing is that some of them even reached the United States, and some of the United States early pulp fiction and pulp magazines reached the Czech lands in the 1920s and 30s. We know that not much. The problem is that except of two writers, virtually all of these writers wrote usually one novel or one short story collection. That means nobody really started to create that kind of a milieu where the worlds would be created. There are only two writers from those times, Václav Hrubý and J.M. Troska, who really created the science fiction worlds of the future. They did, one of them did really 2 trilogies, the other did, I think, 7 novels, some of them in various volumes, which have also either the interplanetary conflicts or they do have also the global future wars. That means it was really a time which is totally not known. My friend and I were doing on the anthology of the early Czech science fiction in the 1920s and 30s, and we discovered it's extremely interesting. And I think that, as Jean-Paul said, European or the world science fiction is something we really still don't know much. And it's something to discover, something to find more. Because I wrote a couple of articles about Japanese and Chinese science fiction in Southeast Asia and African. And every of these countries had their proto-science fictions. They have their early writers of science fiction who usually had no followers. Usually are standing alone. And most recently, I was absolutely shocked after spending 5 years in the Philippines. I was browsing through the old amazing stories of the 1930s and trying to find some letters. And I found a letter from a reader of amazing stories from the Philippines. And he was writing, I am reading amazing stories here in the Philippines. And we were saying, who was the man? How he really understood it? And we don't know. He's only a name. We don't know who was he, what he was doing, how he got the magazines. We don't know. This is the thing which we trying to put together by creating that more internationalization view of it. And there was a panel today in the morning about the lost science fiction writers, lost voices, the people we lost. In a way, these were not even found. That means the world is really wide and science fiction is really something worth discovering more in all the world.
It's truly bizarre, too, how science fiction is proliferated around the world. Today, we're trying to do this deliberately, but in World War II, pulp magazines were actually used as ballast in boats. And a lot of the American magazines that had made it over to Europe were because they were used as ballast. It was not an intentional distribution by any means. It was just, we need stuff to weigh the ship down. So my hope is today that publishers and translators can work together to remedy this and to open that world conversation up. And interestingly, this book, it doesn't have the colonialism of so much science fiction. And it holds up today for those reasons. A lot of the things that science fiction has been criticized for getting wrong or focusing on is absent in this book, which is sort of unusual for the era. I also find it interesting that it fits squarely into the tradition of channeled writings. The subtitle of this book is Transcribed from Beyond. And it's an interesting thing, whether you believe in spiritualism or not. There are a lot of channeled works out there today. A lot of the self-published books in the New Age field are channeled, allegedly. Whether they are or not, something that I think is common for a lot of writers to say is when they reach their flow state, they're just taking dictation. I know this as a writer. When you really are in that zone, it just sort of pours out, and you feel like you're transcribing from beyond, that it's not coming from you, that it's coming from something else. So this book fits squarely into that tradition too. I can't make any claims as to the truth of it. Maybe it's just the flow state thing, who knows, but it sort of transcends science fiction. It's not a New Age book, but it does share that in common with it, which is pretty fascinating. I know at my bookstore, a lot of readers come in looking specifically for channeled works.
Maybe I'll say another thing. That means when Carleton told me that he translated a novel, I was really in a deep shock because I am a lifelong science fiction fan and I really read a lot of Czech science fiction, but never read that specific book in Czech before Carleton translated it, and it pushed me to read it. And I said to myself, why really? The Martians, Procházková, highly unimportant work, nobody cared. But yes, the situation is changing. It's a woman writer. It's a totally different world than when I started reading science fiction in the 1980s and 70s. It is totally different. And maybe this English edition really brings Procházková and that type of fiction to the knowledge of the experts of Slavonic literatures, because Slavic literatures are quite complicated field where there is a plenty of people and plenty of study. And that means we will jump to the other book, which Carleton translated. It's absolutely opposite of the first book. It means, as I said, this is a highly unknown writer nobody ever heard of, and now she's alive. The opposite thing is Jiří Karásek z Lvovic. He is the classic of Czech literature. Everybody knows, everybody speaks. When you go to the Conference of Slavic Studies, there is at least somebody who is giving some presentation of him, putting him into the context. But in the same moment, both these books have the first English edition this very year. That means it's quite interesting comparing it. And I will say that Karásek z Lvovic is not a science fiction. Well, Martians is. Karásek z Lvovic is a borderline fantastic book with a Gothic and fantastic elements. And I will give maybe a floor once more to Carleton to say more about totally different book. But it's also in the same field.
Before you speak to that, Carleton, I wonder if I could ask you a question about the rediscovery of the Martians. How did you come across this text, and where was it hidden for so long?
But the Karásek book in particular?
Martians.
Oh, the Martians. Well, let's see. There's a wonderful forum on Facebook actually called Checklist. And it's a forum where translators of Czech and English meet, sometimes other languages, but the common factor is Czech. And the guy who runs it is he's a science fiction enthusiast. And he said, well, what about this book? And I said, what book? I'd never heard of this book.
Nobody ever heard of the book.
Nobody ever heard of the book, except for this wonderful Czech science fiction scholar, a colleague of Jaroslav, Ivan Adamovich. He basically read everything that was written in Czech, anywhere close to science fiction. And he had an entry for this particular author and book in his encyclopedia of Czech science fiction. And since then, he's learned more about her. It turns out that his Uncle Mirek lived in the same town that Procházková was from. And so he went and he found some civil records. But as I was looking through Ivan's encyclopedia, I realized that there weren't any other women before Procházková who really wrote anything like science fiction. So we had a conversation and we agreed that this was the first. And that made it kind of fun. So, but maybe moving on to Karásek for a little bit here. So, borderline fantastic novel. Let's talk about it a little bit, and maybe we can decide. So, the book that we have here at the front of the table today is called Manfred Macmillan. It's the first book in a trilogy. The trilogy is called The Three Magicians. The magicians in the name of the trilogy are Gothic magicians. This goes back to a tradition of itinerant magic makers in Europe and later beyond. These magicians were performers, and they often sold medical cures on the side. They might project ghosts by using a magic lantern and smoke, and they would produce these phenomena. But they created these phenomena for an audience, and they would move from town to town. Some of them became very famous. There was a German guy named Schweppper. He had a coffee house in Leipzig, and I think he even traveled a bit. But even more famous was Cagliostro, who was a Sicilian magician, born in very humble circumstances, but he could later boast performing for the crowned heads of Europe. And I don't know how many of you watched The Wizard of Oz over Thanksgiving, but that is what the wizard in The Wizard of Oz said that he did on his shingle. He said that he visited the crown heads of Europe and he traveled around and he performed magic for them. That is the tradition behind the Three Magicians. So, moving on from there, I call it a fantastic trilogy. There's a template, so in each book in the trilogy, you have a magician who is strong and powerful and can perform certain sorts of magic, and he's accompanied by a more passive personality, who's the narrator, typically. The author of these three books was Jiří Karásek Zelbovich. Zelbovich is an affectation. It's a pretense of an aristocratic surname. We'll talk about why he wanted to appear aristocratic. He was born in Austria-Hungary, when the Habsburg Empire was in operation, and he lived to see the independent state of Czechoslovakia. He did his best to project a certain persona, and this persona was that of a decadent writer. He tried to appear to be more of a bad boy than he actually was. He worked for the postal ministry, and he was an official for many years. One of his compatriots remarked that if you looked at all the decadents that claimed to be bad boys and how they actually lived, well, maybe not that convincing. But that was his persona. Decadence was a Europe-wide literary phenomenon. It started in France, and for Karásek, one of his most important predecessors was Oscar Wilde. So Oscar Wilde, of course, wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray. That is a fantastic story. And Oscar Wilde was, of course, decadent, and it got him in trouble. As a persona, Karásek was a dandy, a mystic, and an artist, and we'll talk a little bit about each of those. In genre terms, you can describe this trilogy as being Gothic or Neo-Gothic. The tradition of the magician in literature is kind of a Gothic one. It's neo-romantic in the sense that these magicians were solitary figures who were larger than life, and yet they were misunderstood by the people and societies around them. That is classic romanticism, classic Byronism, and you see that in these novels. It is fantastic in that it describes phenomena that don't take place in reality. It describes forms of magic and mind over matter and clairvoyance that are inherently fantastic. I had a fun conversation with a colleague recently who said, well, maybe it's all just a great big joke. Did Karásek really mean this? Did he really believe in this? And I think that he was intrigued by the literary possibilities of this kind of magic. He was seriously interested in it, in that he edited a journal of the occult sciences for a couple of years. But there was probably a bit of pose in all of this for him. I don't think that he meant to misrepresent himself in any way, but I think that perhaps above all, this was a story that had artistic possibility, and he wanted to tell it and frame it in this way for that reason. He's primarily known as a poet, and you see this in this book, which is prose. It really is poetry and prose. There's some beautiful language. Another aspect of this book is the grotesque. The grotesque is a literary phenomenon. It has two important characteristics. One is that the grotesque involves category confusion. We'll give some examples. And secondly, the confusion of these categories creates kind of an ick reaction. You have a reaction of some revulsion or at least some uneasiness. For example, if you confuse the categories of human and animal, you can get a werewolf. And werewolf is kind of scary. This is not something you want to see in your backyard. So there's a bit of revulsion involved because you know the werewolf can harm you. But Francis the Talking Mule is not grotesque because Francis isn't scary. Francis is just a funny animal who talks. So that's one example of the grotesque. Another is combining the human and the mechanical. The German author E.T.A. Hoffmann did this in the early 19th century with his first collection of short stories, and he described an automaton. The automaton is sort of a proto-robot, and as such, it combines human aspects and the mechanical. It moves by itself. It speaks by itself. It appears to have a will of its own. And at least in Hoffman's day, this kind of freaked people out. So that's another example of the grotesque. In this book, and in the trilogy in general, we see the categories of lover and nemesis confused because there is a double in the novel. The title character, Manfred Macmillan, is the lover to the narrator, but Manfred has a double who's sort of an evil twin, and you don't want to hang around the evil twin. So for Francis, the narrator, this is confusing, and it creates a sense of danger. So I think that you can talk about the grotesque here. Another important aspect of this novel that's also grotesque is that, remember, it's written in 1907. Oscar Wilde had been convicted of gross indecency just 12 years before, and same-sex love was illegal all across the continent. In the case of Austria-Hungary, this was true not only of love between men, but also love between women, which was a bit unusual for the time. Most legal codes were silent about love between women. But the idea of love between people of the same gender in this time, I think, was inherently grotesque. And it elicited a certain reaction from the reader. Years later, Karásek was proud to have presented such a story in a way that had literary values or something else that kept other people reading. And they did read it. There was general public criticism, in terms of serious literary criticism of the book. It was republished during Karásek's lifetime. It's a very interesting textual history. We talked a little bit about how there were magicians in real life in continental Europe at this time. This slide just gives a couple of examples, but we can talk about that more later if you like. Cagliostro was a really important example. He is invoked in this book, in Manfred Macmillan. There's a recent study of Cagliostro, if you're interested, by Philippa Fox. She's a British scholar, and this book was published in 2008. It's called The Masonic Magician. This, by the way, is one of the aspects that distinguishes each of the three books in the trilogy. The first book presents Cagliostro as a vehicle for Masonic magic. Masonic magic is sort of a combination of the Kabbalah and of Neoplatonism and of Gnosticism, some very old strains of European magic and esoteric thinking, and the Freemasons combined these in their teachings and their writings in secret societies that they took pretty seriously. Masonic magic was a thing in and of itself. In the second book in the trilogy, Karásek explores Egyptian magic, which was a trend all of its own. There have been recent books, perhaps Jean-Paul has published some, that touch on Egyptian magic. The Gates of Anubis is one title that comes to mind. But that's alive and well. And maybe some of us remember Isis from Saturday morning cartoons. The third book in the trilogy looks at a very interesting local legend from Prague of the golem. Sort of an automaton, but this was allegedly a creature that the high rabbi in Prague was able to animate by placing a shem, a talisman of a sort, under its tongue. And it would come to life and protect the Jewish community. So the third book is about Jewish magic and the Kabbalah. It's a really rich trilogy that draws on various traditions, and I hope that we can get the other books published. The Magician appears in literature, not only in life, but also in literature. We can go back to Schiller, Friedrich Schiller, the German writer, who wrote about the ghost seer. In the late 18th century, there's some other examples on this slide, I won't go into them, but Karásek is part of a long line. As a mystic, I wanted to share with you a little bit about just, whether Karásek really believed in all this stuff. Did he believe in the mysticism? Did he believe in the magic? True or not, I think that this was in part an emotional strategy for him to navigate the world. So this is a guy who was a queer author at a time when love between people of the same gender was illegal. So as Karásek responded to the emerging theories of psychology that pathologized this kind of love, he rejected that and he said, no, this is a mystery that we really don't understand. I am not, quote, a homosexual, which was the scientific term, very new in his day. He described himself as being a member of the third sex, and he believed that this was a really profound mystery of a combination between male characteristics and female characteristics in one person. For him, this was a mystery. It resonated with his temperament, perhaps, as a mystic. He also found mysticism convenient in his art. Because of where and when he grew up, he was raised Catholic, but I suspect that he experienced a personal crisis of faith. He was a seminarian for a couple of years, but he left the seminary, and then he began to write. And in his writing, you see a kind of Catholic aesthetic that you find among decadent writers all across Europe. Karásek had a conversation with a fellow writer who was somewhat older, Julie Nováková, about whether you could portray a Catholic aesthetic in the arts and divest it of doctrine. Karásek felt that you could. Briefly, I think that Karásek, the persona of dandy, was also a convenient kind of mask. The dandy is a sort of fluid figure. In gender terms, it's somewhat fluid. There's a little bit of category confusion. The dandy is a male figure, typically, who dresses in an elegant style. The dandy may affect certain aspects of the aristocratic persona. But for Karásek, who was not an aristocrat, I think that dandyism was just a form it was a potential path to self-reinvention. And he very much wanted to reinvent himself, partly for reasons of safety. As an artist, he found other means to reinvent himself. There was a German term invented in the early 19th century, the Lebenskünstler, the artist of life. This term was revived by the decadents, who were really intrigued by the possibility of taking your very own life and making it a kind of canvas, a place to express yourself artistically. And Karásek was also intrigued by this. This was an option open to people of aristocratic birth, more than to people of bourgeois birth. And going back to his name, Karásek Zelvovic, he adopted Zelvovic as a pretense of aristocratic status because it opened possibilities for him that he wouldn't otherwise have had. So he's a really interesting figure. This last slide shows the original cover for Manfred Macmillan, this book here. The original cover was red velvet with Gothic type. By this time, by 1907, Czech was no longer printed in Gothic type. It was no longer printed in so-called Fraktur, which is a German typeface. It was printed using Latin letters. So the Gothic typeface evoked a Gothic aesthetic. The red velvet expressed some sort of really decadent and sensual sensory experience. There were critics who remarked on the binding and said practically that this is obscene. And we have stories of people who would go to the bookstore wanting to buy this book, but they were kind of embarrassed to take it off the shelf and bring it up to the cashier, partly because of the binding, but also partly because of Karásek and his reputation. So you may be relieved to know that the binding that the book is sold in today is not red velvet. It's a lot safer to buy. There's no reason to be embarrassed. So, is it a fantastic novel? I don't know. There's lots of magic. We could talk some more about that.
Carleton, I wonder, you mentioned in this particular book that it's essentially poetry and prose.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak about the difficulties as a translator faces when dealing with poetic use of language.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, for the question. It's a great question. What I tried to do was to reproduce, as far as I could, the rhythm and some of the sonority in the original prose. So I tried to keep the sentences at their original length, because Karásek very deliberately will have maybe a longer sentence and then another longer one, but then a short one that had impact. And I tried to preserve that. If you look at the words he chooses, he will often take a particular sound, S or P or M or something, and he'll repeat that sound a lot within a short space, and that's also clearly deliberate. So I try to preserve that. It isn't poetry in the sense that he was rhyming so much, but the language is delicious, and I felt it important to try to preserve some of that.
And I know from one language to another it's very different based on the relation between languages. How do you find that does Czech translate well into English?
No, not always. I go through several drafts before I land on something I'm happy with. But one basic challenge with Slavic languages in general is that when you do a first draft into English, you end up with more words. It just takes more space to convey everything that the Slavic text conveys. And this has to do with the way words are formed. It has to do with the way verbs are formed in particular, and Czech can just express more in a more economical way sometimes. It's not always true, but it's often true.
It is difficult in many things because really the languages are so different, but still, we are still close languages. But some languages it's even more complicated. But there is one important thing, for example, translating American fiction into Czech, is that when you look on the American books or English books, very often there is a quote and the person, he said, and it's absolutely automatic. Czech has plenty of variation. He said, he added, he commented, and we use it all the time. In fact, in Czech language, if you're a writer, you cannot say twice, he said, in one paragraph. You have to comment, you have to add, you have to note, something like that. It's quite difficult to bring this into English, but it looks sometimes weird, because he said is the various version of it, but it's very typical. And Karásek is really a rich language and also 120 years old. That means it also has various complications to do. But it's the same with all the other things, and I will at the end mention that book, which is also connected with LA, as the end of our debate. As you see, it's named The Bradbury's Shadow. And why Bradbury? Because Ray Bradbury was the first writer from the American science fiction which was allowed to be published virtually in a communist Czechoslovakia. And Ray Bradbury had a very important influence of the whole, not only Czechoslovak science fiction, but the Czechoslovak literature at all. That means this is why we said that anthology of the 1980s science fiction is really written by the writers who are living in Bradbury's shadow, in a way, because Ray Bradbury was everywhere. Everybody read the Martian Chronicles. Everybody read Fahrenheit 451. Everybody read everything else, because Bradbury was, in a way, a god, and accepted by the communist authorities. That means that's another connection which our science fiction has with LA. And I met with Ray Bradbury 30 years back on a dinner, and I was explaining him how influential he was, even more influential than he could imagine in his life. And he was really surprised in a way that really his writing had such a wide impact on the whole Czech literature of the 1960s, 70s and 80s. That means this anthology is a small tribute to Ray Bradbury and also to Forry Ackerman, who was helping me and who organized my dinner with Ray Bradbury.
It was one of our closing comments, perhaps. I want to come back to just the very beginning and note that when we take the opportunity to look at literature we're interested in translation, we had the potential to learn something about where what we enjoy came from. Because both of these books preceded modern science fiction. Modern science fiction in the U.S. didn't come out of nowhere. There is a tradition in continental Europe that fed upon and contributed to our own national tradition as well. And it's a treat to be able to access that. I'm glad we can.
I absolutely second what Carleton said, and I think it's important to read widely outside of our own culture, because cultural concerns are what fuel the themes. We might have the same tropes from one culture to another, but the concerns being addressed are different. And I think it's really important in understanding each other as human beings to see how those concerns can differ from culture to culture and from time to time. To understand history is so important. It's something that's slipping away in our culture here in America. And so to view those concerns and how they differ from place to place and time to time, I think is tremendously important.
Oh yeah, come to our booth in the dealer's room. You will see plenty of other Czech science fiction and fantasy and fantastic fiction in translation available there.